Okay, so it's 5 after. We can go ahead and get started if you two are ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do our usual format, names, pronouns, and the icebreaker. The icebreaker for today will be, were there any monsters you believed in as a child, or are there any you still believe in today? So I will go first. My name is Jonathan, pronouns he, him. And I'm not sure if this counts as a monster, but there was like a early 90s film that I watched as a kid called Crazy Eight-Legged Freaks. And it's essentially just about like giant spiders. And that has forever scared me of spiders. And I think secretly I still think of those like giant spiders when I see a spider. And even thinking about that movie this morning, I got like a mini panic attack. So I'm still very much afraid. What about you guys?
I can go next. My name is Saul. I use he, him pronouns. I think when I was younger, I believed in La Llorona, which is this like Latinx folktale about a woman who drowned her children and now cries out um, like longing for them. And there's a lot of different renditions and stuff like who she is and why she did what she did. But it definitely scared me when I was younger.
Nice. What about you, Michael?
Hi everyone, my name's Michael. He, him pronouns. I don't know if this really counts as a monster, but I definitely really believed in mermaids as a kid, and have probably some like mild, like hope that still to this day that like they could be a real thing.
Nice. I've noticed in our previous stories you do like mermaids, so that very much is tracking for you. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started in the book. What did we all think of Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova?
I liked it. I thought that it was a quick read too. I mostly I guess because I enjoyed it. Um, there was definitely a lot of or some sections of the book that I went back and reread just because they were really powerful that I just had to go back and um, kind of see them in the entirety of the book after I finished it to go back and see
Mm.
what those were.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a book that I guess I'm a little bit torn on. I loved the first portion, like Mago's entire perspective, I thought was so amazing. I also love the fact that we start off with Santiago already having died, as opposed to starting off before his death. That kind of drops us right into the grief portion of the story, which I think is the strongest part of the story. But there were some parts in the middle I didn't love. But the end wrapped it up pretty nicely. So I don't know. I can't say if I loved it, but I definitely didn't hate it. So yeah. What about you, Michael?
Actually, I really enjoyed it. I like that. I didn't catch the like stages of grief thing at first. I think so
Mm,
you put it in the Discord. Then like thinking back, that definitely gave it a little bit more of like a bump up for me. And I really liked the like the four perspectives. I don't know if we necessarily needed all four of them, but I did like that it was like that it was broken up. And I will agree with you. There's some parts in the middle where I was like, I
yeah.
don't know if these are like doing for me what maybe they're intended to do for the story. But no, I enjoyed it.
Mm. Okay. Since we're on the perspectives, I'm curious. I know Michael said that you don't believe that we needed all of them. I agree. I'm curious which perspective, if we were to take one out, which perspective could be taken out of the story? I will definitely say Lena. I think that her perspective to me was very pointless. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I kind of think Lena too is the maybe the weakest one. And there were some times. I mean, the the dad's perspective was important too, but there were a few times where I don't know if some of the things that were we're getting here were like as impactful as Magos were or M's. But yes, I agree. We could have maybe done without Lena and just heard that from another voice.
Yeah, I think for me, like the part of Lena's that I did enjoy was her talking about how she had been perceived as a monster by her mother. To see in the book somebody who was quote unquote human and had that perception of themselves was interesting. But maybe just because it was, I don't know if it was the shortest, it felt like the shortest perspective, maybe besides M's. Um, that it was so short that it really could have just not been that big of a part of it. I also agreed that Joseph's at some point, I was like, okay, this is getting the plot along, but I don't know if it's necessarily that connected to the entirety of the meaning of the book.
I'm glad we're bringing up Joseph because he's a character I have a lot to say about. So
Yeah.
we'll get there. Before we get to Joseph, though, I'm curious, what do we think of our main character? Well, one of our main characters, Magos.
A little strange at times. That was definitely like one of my big like takeaways. Especially there were some parts in the beginning that maybe felt a little disconnected, or maybe just because that section I think took me the longest to like get into. That may have just been like me trying to get into the book itself, but definitely some like fun little quirks. A nice way to put it.
Yeah. Oddly enough, Magos, I think, is my favorite character. I just thought she was so interesting. I also really appreciate how the author, it seems like, made an attempt to show a different, someone's first step in their grieving process not being the typical. It seems like Magos throughout the entire story was in denial of her son's death, to the point to where she thought that if she brought Santiago back as the lung, that she and Joseph and the lung version of Santiago could move to Mexico and live happily ever after, which for everyone else in the story seemed so insane, but to her it made perfect sense. Um, and yeah, I think I'm also typically drawn to more unhinged sort of characters. And she's definitely that. And I think she's not your typical mother character. Um, so yeah, I think that she is for me the most interesting character in the entire story. But there are points in the middle where I began to hate her, but I hated more characters more. So
Yeah, it can seem frustrating at times because it seems like she doesn't care about anybody but herself and the way that
mhm.
she's healing. But in that itself, right, can just be a coping mechanism to her son's death. But I did find her a bit frustrating, after she bites her mom and the dog, or
Mhm.
Monstrilio bites these other characters, and she's still so attached to this idea that he can be Santiago, which eventually she's more or less true. Um, that I think it does. I don't know. It just shows, like I think, like you're saying, it's not the typical grieving process that we would expect from a mother. So it was really interesting to read.
Also, I think for me personally, I noticed there seemed to be almost like a shift in writing style from Magos's perspective to everyone else's. I think that Magos, it felt so emotional and raw and real. For everyone else, things felt a little bit superficial for me, which is why I think I had a difficult time connecting to the other characters as much as Magos. I wonder if anyone else felt that. Did you guys also think that the writing style changed a bit?
I don't know if I caught it, but thinking back, it does feel like there may be some places where that is probably intentional. Um, yeah, but I don't know. I didn't really I didn't really consider that.
Yeah, the biggest change that I saw was between like M and everybody else. That's really when I noticed a change in like the writing or the perspective, that M was just so to like the point, and it wasn't a lot of like more in the writing than kind of what he was thinking, and sometimes a little bit what he was feeling. But um, when I was reading M's part, it just felt like, okay, this is, maybe it's also because it was the end. So I was like, how is this going to end in so little pages? But the way that he, the way that he was writing, it was like so straight to the point that I was like, okay, this will probably have like an ending that doesn't feel too rushed, but rushed at the same time, just because of the way that M speaks.
I'm curious, when reading sort of the beginning of Magos's perspective, did anyone notice signs of her more artistic side? I was kind of shocked that at the end, or at least in the middle of the story, she became an artist. I didn't get that in the beginning, but once I saw that she became an artist, I went back and I read the line about her wishing her son's death was like a pieta, which is like a depiction of the Virgin Mary holding Christ's dead body. And she also describes like death as boring, and she describes Joseph as being boring and sad now that he's grieving. Did anyone else notice that, those early signs of her potentially being an artist?
I think I definitely notice a lot of attention to detail and like intention, or at least to her, what seems like strong intention behind what she's doing, that would like sort of feed into that artist narrative. But I don't know. I necessarily thought about that one either. I really thought more um, that a lot of what she's doing is driven by, it feels like she doesn't want to lose like that identity of being a mother, or she feels like it's slipping away, and that was driving a lot of those things. But maybe I don't know, I like the artist narrative too.
Yeah, I did not expect her to then become this performance artist, and to be so successful at it.
Yeah.
But I think, they mentioned her, yeah, doing these plays with Santiago and Joseph when they were, that initial family. So it's interesting then to see her continue this now in like a professional setting, now that M is there. Mostly in that performance that we actually get to read about, I thought was one of the strongest scenes that I read, that I had to go back and read again. Just because of everything. And I think that when you talk about the piata, I think that you said it was called, I think that that is like, now I just made that connection, that that's kind of like what she wanted, right? Like that's kind of her rendition of that. That now she's kind of putting out to the world, that she finally gets to have.
I think one of the more frustrating parts of that we get in Magos's perspective is the part where Jackie tells Jackie being Magos's mother's, I guess, like maid or like caretaker, tells her the story of the woman in her village with the heart and the child and the man. Did anyone notice? Did anyone think that was such an inappropriate story to tell someone who just lost their child?
Definitely, mostly after finding that she has a
Yeah.
lung. Like, what did she expect from her to do at that point?
I kind of thought like, oh, Jackie knows Magos and knows that she may be a little like off kilter. I mean, like really buy into this, and that at some level it may have been like a way to like help her grieving process. I mean, like, yes, definitely inappropriate, but I also think, Jackie's been around for a really, really long time, right? Like essentially most of Magos's life. So maybe she knows that this is like exactly what Magos needs to hear in this moment to not like send herself over the edge in some other way.
Mm. I think I just also thought it was so weird because then when the lung, I guess the early signs of M, starts to attack the dog and then, of course, attack Magos's mother, Jackie is so angry and like shocked that Magos did the little, I guess you call it a spell or ritual, whatever. But it's like, what did you expect her to do? You told her that and you want her to do nothing. That I don't know. I think that was just so odd. But you have a good point, Michael. Yeah, maybe she did think that um, that's what Magos needed. But also, I kind of feel like if you know Magos and know that she's a bit more unhinged or doesn't have the best grasp on reality, uh, she might do something very odd with that kind of story, which she did. So, yeah. As the lung turns into M or Monstrilio, did anyone get the sense that the lung or the monstrous side of Monstrilio was meant to be like a physical representation of queerness itself? I noticed that like several times when M is still just his lung form, he's talked about as being shameful, as being ugly, and then like people are consistently trying to change him and make him into something more human, which for me just kind of represents how some people can interpret queerness as being ugly and abomination, monstrous. Did anyone else pick up on that at all in the story?
I definitely pick up on some parts of other people, just seeing certain phases of Monstrilio's development is like just that like just a phase like this will be grown out of, and that kind of reflects that in some way, I think. But I think there probably is definitely some like tie-in to queerness, and I will say I did not expect I guess everyone in the book to be gay.
Yeah.
But I guess I really wasn't expecting it for M, but I do think that we got some like almost kind of queer coded anecdotes about Santiago that may make that make sense. But um, yeah, I don't know that I answered your question, but
You did.
Yeah, I don't think that I connected M's like monster narrative to like queerness initially until he like himself in the story was queer. Then I
Mm.
kind of saw a lot of similarities with like the types of hookups that he has and like how he has to go about those. Um, that then I was like, okay, now I'm starting to see this like narrative of what the I guess what the author was trying to portray. Yeah, but I also didn't expect everybody in the book to be gay or to be queer.
Mhm.
That when Joseph's part started, I was like, whoa, like kind of taken out of left field, because
Mhm.
I didn't expect him to one move on so quickly to another person, but to also um, be gay.
Mm. Now that we're on that, I guess I'm curious, do we think that the author's decision to make essentially every quick character, even like Magos' mother, seems to have at least some sort of queer relationship with Jackie? Do we think that inclusion of making all the characters queer strengthened or hindered the story? Um, I was a bit, I don't know if I would say it hindered, but it's definitely a choice. I think anytime an author sets up that kind of story where everyone essentially is queer in some way, I just never really understand why. But I mean, to be fair, once I learned that um, Magos and Joseph met in art school, it made a lot more sense. I think that majority of art students are a bit queer, so I was like, okay, it's not that strange. But initially, I thought it was so odd. What did you guys think?
I did also think it was odd for sure. Maybe not a choice I would have made, but I also don't write novels. So no, but it was a little strange. It was kind of nice because I don't think we get a lot of stories where everyone is queer. Um, but also it kind of gave a tiny bit of this narrative of like, oh, a queer man and a queer woman can't have a child without the child dying or being a monster or both or being gay.
Mhm.
But no, it definitely was a choice, and I don't think I quite picked up on the piece between Jackie and Magos's mother. But now that you say that, no, it definitely feels like that, especially for that relationship to go on for so long.
Yeah, this is the first book that I've read where every character um is queer. Um that I also didn't know, like, if it was for a reason that he had made everybody queer, or if it was just I like that it wasn't this, I guess, like, big thing in the book, right? That he didn't have to like go through the arc of like explaining like now Joseph is with somebody else because there was a change in his life. Like that was just who he was.
Mhm.
So there was like explanation behind that, of like, first he was married to Magos and now he has moved on to Peter. So I did like that. Um, and I thought it was interesting too, because, from the very start, when it's Magos and Lena, we already have that narrative that there is this other, like, romance there.
Mhm.
So it was interesting to then to kind of see how they were kind of a triangle, Lena, Joseph,
Mhm.
and Magos. Um, because I don't remember if exactly like Lena and Joseph had dated or not, or the fact that they were just maybe friends first. But it did seem like they were kind of carrying this life together,
Mhm.
even if they hadn't seen Lena for a while.
Mhm.
And I
That's a
did. Go ahead. Sorry.
no. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think one other thing that maybe made this a little bit nicer, more enjoyable too, is that even with all of these main characters being queer, we didn't get like it wasn't tied to we didn't get any coming out stories, and it wasn't tied to like
Mm.
trauma around queerness really, which I think is kind of refreshing because we don't. I feel like a lot of stories that I read at least that have queer main characters, there's some like big trauma thing that's tied to it, or a lot of it is tied to some sort of like coming out journey, or like big acceptance journey, and we don't really see that specifically in relation to queerness with any of these characters, which is kind of nice. I mean, we do get some parts, I think, you know with like Lena in particular, talking about that, but I don't know that we really get them with anyone else, at least not that I remember.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I think that for every character in the story, their queerness is kind of just matter of fact. It's not like some big announcement, and there's really no negative reaction from anyone about their queerness. I mean, even Magos's mother is encouraging her to go after Jackie, not Jackie, but Lena,
Hmm.
which I think oftentimes more religious family members, especially the older ones, don't do that. So definitely nice to see. Yeah, that's a good point, Michael.
It's interesting to see too, kind of everybody's own like queerness develop. Like I'm trying
Mm,
to like make a connection and wondering what your thoughts are, between like Lena's baths and like the way that she has that kind of arrangement with the women that she sees, and then
mhm,
also M's, like biting and like that, kind of thing
mm,
that he wants to do within the relationships that he has. It just feels like this like hidden thing that like both of them do within their queerness. And since they have been kind of the two, characters in the novel that have been like deemed monsters, I just thought that was interesting that one is like this much softer, not necessarily sexual part, and then M's like much more like violent act of biting.
Mm. Wow, you brought up a lot of great points that I was going to bring up later. Before we talk about Lena's bathing, I guess fetish or kink, I'm curious, what did we think of Lena as just like a general character? I think I thought that she felt a little bit useless, but I mean, I think I understand the point of her character. I think that her being our surgeon is important because she helps with a lot of the medical side of M, since they can't take him to a hospital because he's not fully human, of course. Um, and I think I just felt that she was a third wheel for like the entire story. She just kind of hung around Joseph and Magos and really had no, I don't know, no life of her own outside of Magos, especially. Uh, did you guys notice that, or did you guys think that she was in a story for a certain reason?
I think it was nice having like an outside family perspective, um, and maybe like a little bit more background on Joseph and Magos. I don't know that necessarily had to come from like the like Lena's point of view, but there are some elements that definitely help, like you mentioned with like the medical background, uh,
Mm.
like just really help move the story along. But what was I gonna say? I don't know. I don't know, and it feels like maybe a little bit of a commentary on like chosen family. I don't know that we hear anything. I mean, we hear a little
Mm.
bit about um, like Lena's family and rejection, and that maybe this is like this is how she's chosen to identify family is with Joseph and Magos. So I kind of got that as part of it, but um, I'm curious if there are other thoughts or points of view.
Yeah, I think that her life was really dependent on Magos, it seemed like. Like she did a lot of what she did. Mostly maybe not during her whole life, but definitely during this parts of the book, that she was really putting her life on hold, to possibly be with Magos, um, in a way that they were actually together rather than what it seemed like in the book, that it was just Magos not necessarily taking advantage of Lena, but in a way really using a lot of the parts, right? Like staying with her, um, and then the fact that she's a surgeon to help M out. Um, who I did feel like was the kind of third wheel of it all was Peter. When
Mhm.
they had kind of introduced him and then brought him along the whole novel, I was like, okay, well, like he doesn't know about M. They're really lying to him. Um, so I was wondering like
Mhm.
what Peter's role was in all of this, because he felt like Magos like did have, or not Magos, Lena, did have a role because she was there even before Santiago, and definitely before M. Yeah, so Peter was the one that felt like a third wheel to me, in the novel.
Mhm. Right. I I won't go in depth on Peter right now, but I will say my entire thought process reading Joseph's part and then when we introduce Peter is just poor Peter. I wanted him to leave that relationship so bad, but um, I know, Saul, you mentioned earlier um, Lena's mother thinking that she was a demon or a monster. I'm curious if anyone caught the reasoning why. I do remember there's a portion where Lena says, I think when she was born, bad things began to happen. Um, but outside of that, I didn't really get any other reason why her mother hated her so much. And I'm curious, did anyone think it was possibly because Lena seemed to be openly queer most of her life? Or do you think there was some other reason as to why her mother had such strong feelings against her?
I don't know that I picked up on any other reasons, but I did. I really enjoyed the parts where she sort of like antagonized her mother or like really like dug in and played it up. That those parts were really fun to read in here. But I don't know that I have an actual answer to your question, but it did just trigger that memory of her. I think saying that she was like pretending to be demonic and stuff just to antagonize her mother.
Yeah, I don't quite remember any other part, but I do like that part that you mentioned, Michael. Just like also such a different narrative that we sometimes get. Like if Lena was like if her mom did hate her because of this queerness that she attached to being a demon, for then Lena to play that up, I think it's really funny. Because then it also shows that maybe I mean it doesn't show because I think that Lena was still hurt by her mother, but to then put on the face to her mother um, that she doesn't care what her mother maybe says or that she's just going to lean into the narrative, even if she knows that's not true.
Okay, and now I guess we have to talk about the biggest part of Lena's storyline. What do we think of the bathing kink? Do we think that related to her mother at all, or was that a whole different reason as to why she enjoyed that so much?
Maybe it does have to do with her mother. Now that you mention, I can definitely see that. Maybe if, like, I'm thinking if Lena has lived in Mexico her life, and I guess maybe she lived in New York at some point, but in a place where queer relationships aren't so accepted that she doesn't get to have a lot of like the relationship type of things that come um with a relationship, that maybe if she has had relationships with other women, it has been like just sexual. So for them to have these parts of relationships that are not necessarily sexual is something that she doesn't get to have normally. Um, that's what I was maybe thinking of. Like, it doesn't seem like she has had these relationships where she could get this out of. So now she feels like she has to seek that out in other ways.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I picked up on it as being tied to her mother, and I initially interpret it as like a way to for her to sort of like express or fulfill her sexuality without having to be like super public about it. But I mean, thinking back, I like took that out of my mind just because of how open she is otherwise. So I didn't really feel like it needed to be the case. And I don't think I ever like revisited assigning it a specific like purpose or background, and just kind of chalked it up to it being her just like her kink. But there obviously has to be, I mean, there doesn't have to be, but I assume there is something more behind it, because it is such a specific thing to include, and for it to be like essentially half of what we get about Lena. Definitely something there.
Mm. I think for me, it definitely was tied to her mother. I think knowing that her mother didn't at least seem to want her, I could imagine that she didn't receive a lot of the nurturing that most children receive from their parents when they're children. Um, so I think it ties to that. But also, now that I'm thinking about it, I think if we are to believe that Lena is some sort of demon or monster, it kind of feels like worship. This bathing her and like essentially dressing her and then tucking her into bed. It's, I don't know, to me, it kind of feels like worship. Did anyone else pick up on that too? Or is that just my mind running?
I didn't pick up on that, but I really do like that interpretation. I can definitely see that as worship.
Yeah, I actually I like that a lot too, especially because I think, besides M obviously being like a not human creature, Lena's like I think the second closest thing we get to a like monster in the book, and that definitely like
Mhm.
adds to that definition for her.
Mm.
Yeah, because later on we get again with the comparison to M, that last person that M eats, kind of seeing that as like a right. I think that person was part of a cult. Um,
Mhm.
that like once they were eaten by their god, that they got to like be enlightened or go beyond. So that I can definitely see those both like worship parallels even between the two of them.
Mm. That's a good point. I didn't think of that. And I'm curious, did anyone else notice that out of all the characters in the story that want to change M, um, Magos, Joseph, Magos's mother, Jackie, Lena is the only one that seems to maybe not love him for who he is, but at least accept him for who he is and accept that he eats animals and possibly people. Do we make any parallels to Lena being the only character doing that, and then Lena also at the time being our only openly queer character?
I mean, now I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it really seemed that it was Lena, and then later on the uncle.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I'm also wondering like people's thoughts on the uncle. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, but it did seem like for a while it really was just Lena, who right didn't want to cut the arm tail off,
Hmm.
and she framed it as not knowing like surgically like what would happen, but it definitely was more about her just wanting M or Monstrilio at that point to be what he was meant to be. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And now I hate to do it, but we have to talk about Joseph. What do we think about Joseph?
He was okay, I guess. I didn't
Yeah.
like the kind of the whole thing with Peter and the engagement was a little interesting. Um, I don't know. He just for some reason didn't feel like very strong of a character for me, especially to have such a like big point of view. I guess I just didn't understand some of his motivations um, the same way that I you could really easily understand. For sure with Magos and M, and a little bit for Lena too, but um, I'm not sure. And I found it very interesting to see like a little bit later the relationship between him and M, especially like as a queer man to a queer male child was a little it was interesting because I don't think that's like a relationship we get to see a lot. But I mean, just in general, I'll just say he was okay.
Yeah, I agree with Magos that he was a little boring. Um, but yeah, I did like what you said, Michael, about the relationship that he had with M, um, and being able to see that in a novel was really great. Though I don't know how helpful he was to M um, in his relationships, um,
Mhm.
but it was definitely something good to see, um, even though he was quite a boring character to me.
Mhm. I think for me, Joseph is my least favorite character. Honestly, I was like borderline hating him. I think I just felt so upset that he kept lying to Peter over and over again. And Peter, at least, is described as being this like perfect man, attractive, good job, caring, sweet. And like, why are you lying? Like, you can't just tell him. And then it also annoyed me that he accepted Peter's proposal, but it didn't seem like he really wanted to marry Peter. It's like, how can you enter into an engagement or later on a marriage, but you can't even tell him the truth about your son? I know, of course, that Joseph does say Peter wouldn't believe him, but I think if you're going to marry someone, you have to trust that you can at least try to get them to believe you. And especially if you show Peter proof, like he doesn't have any reason but to believe you, right? Um, so yeah, I did not like Joseph at all. And it's interesting, Michael, that you pointed out a queer adult man's relationship to a queer young adult, because even in M's young adult life, I noticed that Joseph was still the only one hoping that M would change, while everyone else around him, Lena, Magos, um, kind of came to terms with the fact that he eats animals and whatever else. Um, but Joseph was the only one still holding out hope that he would change. Um, did anyone else notice that at all?
Yeah, he was definitely the one that kept insisting that M could be different or that they should do certain things so that he could be different. But I would say that Magos was also kind of holding on to that by the fact that she was calling him Santiago for a long time
Mm,
until
mm,
eventually she, after he maybe bit the neighbor, that she was like, okay,
mm,
no, like this is not Santiago. Like I have to come to the term with the fact, with the term, come with the terms that he is in fact not Santiago. Um,
mm, mm,
yeah, so I thought that both Magos and Joseph were holding on to this vision of who they hoped Monstrilio will be, maybe just in different ways.
mm, mm.
No, no other thoughts from me on that one.
And I'm curious, what did we think of Magos's art performance, Sun? Did we think that was appropriate at all?
No, not at all. But and I think that um, is part of. I think that a big part of her identity, like, is, or she wants to tie it to being a mother, and that's just like another example of her not wanting to let that go or redefine that or hold on to it. Um, and I pick up on a little bit of what Soul said too about the way she still refers to M as Santiago. I think that there's a part of her that like just doesn't want to give up the possibility that like her child is still in there, even though she can definitely still be a mother to M in other ways, and definitely still is. Um,
Mm,
but that there is some, to me at least, it reads as like some version of motherhood or parenthood that is very very precious to her, and I think she feels like it's being taken away.
mm,
Um, and that the performance was just like an example of that. But
mhm.
no, I didn't. I wouldn't have done that. I also probably would never in a situation where I'm casting spells and raising corpses into a monster. But
I knew from the moment that we discovered that the performance was named Sun that it was going to be messy.
Mhm.
And I was fully there for it as a reader, but I also definitely knew that it was going to be inappropriate and make either Joseph or feel terrible, which it made both of them do. Um, and I also wonder if she like needed to do that in order to like feel like she could move on to have this like public display
Mhm.
of grief that she did. I'm just like trying to think of like from her like what what she could have gotten out of that, because it is such a deep thing in her life to like bring public, and also with
Mhm.
like the pajamas being the same as the ones that Santiago wore, but having M be there at the same time, because this is at the point where she's still calling him Santiago, I believe. So
Mhm.
like she must have known that that would make an impression on M, and I'm wondering if she was trying to say anything with that, of like she knew that her son had died and was somebody different, or maybe she didn't even realize that herself by that point, that she was making that kind of like conclusion within her mind. Um, but I found it really powerful, and I felt uncomfortable reading it, as like putting myself in Joseph's or M's position, that I would have also left the performance, and for her to come out and just kind of be like, "Oh, where's M?" Like, "Oh, he ran away." That I would have never thought that he would leave. Um, yeah, that to me, then I was like, okay, well, what did she think the performance was, if not this like really emotional piece?
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you too. I think it just was so inappropriate, and that was the moment where my love for Mago began to shift. I thought that was just so insensitive and hurtful to both Joseph and Santiago, or M, I should say, not Santiago. Um, but it does tie back to one of the first lines from her perspective in the book, where she says she always wished that Santiago's death would have been a Pieta. The Pieta that she's comparing herself to is exactly like that scene, the performance that she did, the Virgin Mary like cradling Christ's body while she's crying, and it's on display in like one of the most popular public churches in Rome. So it has a huge audience. And she also says that she always wished his death had a big audience. So I think for me, it just seemed like she was such an attention seeker. And I don't know if I really felt that that was her grieving process. It just seemed like attention. But I guess also, I don't believe that she had truly grieved prior to that moment. So it could be her grieving process, sure. But then why invite Joseph, knowing that that's going to upset him? Or did she expect that Joseph would be okay with that? He would find it inspiring? I don't know. Also, I'm curious, did we ever pick up on what Joseph told Peter about that? Like, what does Peter think about Joseph having had two sons? Because I don't know. I guess I'm asking, did we ever piece together what Joseph had told Peter happened with his dead son? 'Cause I don't remember him ever saying he had two sons.
Yeah, I also don't remember that, what the story was after that, because I remember that Peter called Santiago as well, because that's what Magos called him.
Hmm.
So to me, it seemed like he knew that they had one son, and that or Joseph just called him M. So I'm not sure what happened after that. But I did want to bring up the fact that you were saying how she kind of wanted an audience,
Hmm.
and I can definitely see that. But then also to then go back to the other scene where the mom wanted to throw or to have a service for Santiago after he died,
Mm.
and that people came over to the house, and that was a point where she didn't want to have that audience, right? She had that cousin who was making a big scene, and she's like, ugh, like she just wants
Mhm.
attention. Um, so then to see her then want that, or like make that space for herself, to have an audience, I think it's like a maybe it took her that long to like be able to have this grief publicly, even if it was more for the attention of it all, so that people could see. And I also, when I was reading this, remember that earlier thing that she had said, that she wished that Santiago's death had had an audience rather than just her and Joseph.
Mhm.
Yeah, but not sure what Peter thought of it all.
I'm not sure either, and I don't know if I recall like a real explanation. But I also just kind of for my own curiosity wonder, like in this world where there are like stories of these cases like M, at least enough that like someone in your family knows about it. Are there like creatures running around, or like some like pseudo people everywhere, and it's just kind of like common knowledge or face value that like, oh, there, maybe there's like someone in your apartment building that's like not entirely a person anymore, and they're just like kind of okay with it, or have some understanding, or I don't know. That is a piece for me that I was kept wanting to hear more about, and I think we only got that little piece from Jackie, and never anything beyond that.
Mm, that's a really good point.
I do love books like this, kind of like, I don't think that this book was like a horror novel, because a lot of
Hmm.
the things weren't like scary per se, but kind of more on like the magical realism type of books, where things like this just become like common, almost like they just kind of seep into real life. Right, that there had been a man who grew out of a heart, or that there is now a boy who came out of a lung. Yeah, it does make me think of like, okay, is there other people there, or is this just kind of like in a realm of the universe where things like this could happen? And kind of like with the queerness also being, right, like just something that doesn't have to be talked about, it just is. Like this also doesn't have to be, like, it could be that everybody, or that there's a lot of other people that are living this life, um,
Mm.
and it just is, rather than like this never happened before type of thing. Like, there's history that it has happened, and that maybe it will happen again.
Hmm. That's a really good point because now that you mentioned that, Soul, I'm thinking back to everyone's reaction to seeing the lung become M. No one is really shocked that it worked. They're more shocked that Magos did it. So it kind of gives the impression that maybe everyone kind of accepts that these folk tales or myths are real. That's a really good point. Hmm.
I was also thinking, when you were saying, right, that the Pietra was it Jesus that they were holding, maybe, that you said,
Hmm. Hmm.
who died, and kind of maybe the representation that Magos was trying to do of like Santiago, this like a good character, like inherently good character, dying, and now she has like the other half of that, who is maybe not intrinsically good but evil, right? This like monster, and the duality of those two characters. I wonder like if that's also what impacted M so much, that he was seeing like this perfect thing that his parents did want, this good child, and now he is what they have, this like monster. So just kind of seeing the duality of both of those characters as like good and evil.
Mm. Another really great point. So I'm curious, did you guys pick up on what sparked M's outburst to attack his neighbor? Obviously, yes, he was at the art performance, but what exactly triggered that much violence? Um, did either one of you pick up on that? I couldn't really understand that reaction.
I don't know that I got a specific trigger as much as just thinking that like it was kind of like an extreme emotional response to seeing his mother do this honestly like kind of traumatizing thing in front of everyone, and for at least for M to know really what it was about in a way that no one in the audience did, and how personal that is. Probably, I don't. It was triggering in a lot of ways, and I'll also say that M doesn't feel like M is intelligent and seems to be like pretty aware and like working through things, but does seem to have a lot of like emotional development still to do, and that may just be like a way to deal with those emotions until they're like more. I don't want to say more human coping mechanisms, um, but I don't. That's those are the best words I have to phrase it.
Yeah, I think after like seeing other things, how much really had to resist against this like urge or this like need um to eat people. Um that was such a powerful thing happening right before, or like Michael was saying, really traumatic thing that happened, that he was just so emotional, and he probably met neighbor in the hallway and just like couldn't maybe help himself, of like he already has all this emotions and energy. um or maybe because I think that they said that the cat was also there, maybe like he started eating the cat first, and then the neighbor came, and then it just kind of dominoed after that. um but it did seem like a response to the performance by Magos.
I think now that I'm thinking about it, I think that M seeing that performance and seeing Magos mourn Santiago, I think that's the moment that M realized he's not Santiago. Because why would Magos be mourning Santiago if he was Santiago? So I guess that's when he began to kind of let his monstrous side slip a little bit. And with the cat, I thought it was interesting that Magos harped on how much M loved the cat, and M essentially like eating the entire cat um, began to show that M does have the capability to kill what he loves, which at that moment began to make me think he was at some point going to kill his mother, which I guess I was gearing up for, but of course he doesn't. But yeah. Did anyone else pick up on the importance of M killing the cat?
I don't know if I picked on it then, but do I remember correctly? Maybe later on when we are getting his perspective, I kind of remember him saying that like he liked the cat, but he had thought about eating the cat before, and he had like to hold himself back from it. So even like again, like Mago seeing him as Santiago, but he's not really Santiago, and really trying to be Santiago, but knowing himself that he's not. Um, yes, so I totally agree with you that seeing his mom more in Santiago kind of broke it in him that he wasn't that, and that maybe he shouldn't try to be.
Mm, mm,
I kind of thought the cat 2 geared us up a little bit for um like M really has this like these kind of desires for people that he's affectionate towards, and that maybe like this was like a little bit of a teaser that like the cat is something he appreciates and is affectionate towards, but still will like eat it. And we see that play out in his like sexual encounters later in the book and romantic encounters, so that maybe that also could have been part of it, or for me seemed like it was part of it.
mm, mm. And I guess before we move on from Joseph, did anyone notice how even though Magos was the primary one who wanted to bring Santiago back as the lung, and Joseph had no interest at all in doing that. Joseph ended up being M's primary caretaker while Magos kind of did nothing. Did anyone else notice that?
Yeah, it definitely felt to me like Joseph was making more of an effort for I don't I don't want to say for M to assimilate, and I think we like made some comments about that earlier, but um was trying to like take care of M more like as a child than just as like as a monster being. So I definitely saw that. Yes.
Mhm.
I was also a little confused by the timeline of it all,
Mhm.
because it seemed like when we were then switching to Joseph's perspective, that maybe then M was 18 or
Mhm.
like much older than what he had been when, right, he had just grown out of the long. So I was also like wondering if he was continuing Santiago's life, like maybe when he kind of realized this boy body, that he was maybe already 8 years old at that point. But even then, there seems like a long period of time between when he was a lung and then more recently a human boy to then this much older like M character. So I was
Mhm.
also wondering that, or perhaps Magos had taken care of him much throughout those kind of like years where he was a boy and then a young adult, and maybe Peter wasn't there. And then after in this young adult life, then Peter was more involved. So I kind of was very confused with that timeline of how old M was supposed to be.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I agree. I mean, we go from Joseph and Lena moving from Mexico City to New York. And then next thing we know, M is getting his first job and like having his first relationship. And I was like, wait, how old is he supposed to be? But then I also thought maybe because he's not totally human, maybe he ages faster than everyone else. So maybe it's been a couple of years because Joseph says he and Peter have been together for 2 years, but there's also a point where he says it's been 7 years since he left. And I don't remember what age he left M at, but I'm assuming if he left him around 11, he'd be 18. Um, but yeah, that was a little bit confusing to me too. Yeah. What do we think of M as a character?
I like I'm glad that we got to have like some uh like conscious thoughts and like a real sort of like character development. Especially seeing like the cover of the book and at least through Magos's perspective, I wasn't sure what Monstrilio was going to like be or turn out to be, or if it was going to be like a like some like creature that like hangs out in the basement and like doesn't talk and they just throw like raw steaks down there. So it was nice to see the um, the side of M that is like thinking and feeling and expressing and communicating. So I wasn't sure if we would get that. And I there's almost a little bit of resignation with I don't want to like say human side, but with like um, how mundane some things that people do, how mundane some things are that people do, like wearing the clothes and the work. He's like, I'm fine with my one outfit, and I'll wear my one outfit every day, and it's not a problem. And I don't mind that my job shelving books goes on forever. Like I can deal with forever. There's there's something like level of certainty and something that goes on forever.
Mhm.
So I don't know, that little bit of resignation was interesting to see, and I don't know, maybe a little bit sad. But I don't know. I'll stop there to see if anyone else has any other things to add before I go for forever, because there's a lot more that we could
Mhm.
add on there.
Yeah, I was glad to have M's perspective and to have his perspective too at the end of the book. Um, it made me feel bad for him to like hear how his life was shaping out. Um, that it was so much different than kind of the previous perspectives where I don't know if I ever felt bad for any of the characters, even though they were going through this like grief. Because like even Magos, when she was grieving, was still being selfish in some of her things. Um, but then it felt when we got to M that he really was living for Magos and for Joseph and for what their hope was, that they wanted to have a son and that the son be Santiago. Um, so it did feel like he was pretending for a lot of it, and that it hurt him to pretend to be anybody but Monstrilio. Um, so I didn't expect the endings, but I was happy to get that ending too, because it felt like it was the best for M. Um, I also wonder too, Jonathan, what you had said, that maybe if he hadn't left, that maybe he would have attacked Magos or any of the
Mhm.
main characters
Mhm.
at some point. Um, so I was glad that that was not the case. But it did, that last perspective did make me feel bad for M. Yeah, yeah, that it just made his life seem much more sad than I had expected it to be.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, M well, I will say at some points he definitely felt more flat to me than other characters. Um, it was good to hear his perspective and his feelings around certain things happening. Um, I just felt so bad for him because thinking back to the story that Jackie told Magos, the man that is born from the little girl's heart is this like gorgeous, perfect man. So I was kind of thinking that when M grew up, he would be that, but he was kind of the opposite. He's this like half human, half monstrous person. He has to like wear a wig that makes his hair look really weird. He has fur. He has a little bit of a like lump on his hip from his removed tail. He has a mouth that kind of opens up half of his face. So he has to wear dentures, which like make his mouth look really weird. I just felt so bad for him having to do all of those things just to fit in and like live up to his parents' pressure. Um, yeah, it was very, very, very sad to read his perspective, but yeah. And I'm curious, do you think that the story makes any sort of commentary on, especially in M's perspective, on the pressure of having to live up to your parents' expectations?
Yes, and I think also some uh, some kind of commentary about um, like battling between like queerness and conformity,
Mm,
and having to choose between the two. But and I don't know that I think Magos had as many expectations as Joseph, but I think that Joseph definitely, it felt to me, it was like trying to like get M to be like a good upstanding New York citizen. And that obviously wasn't what needed to happen for M. But yeah, there's definitely some level there of like trying for M to try and be what Magos and Joseph want him to be, when he will probably, well, we see, doesn't want to be that.
mm.
Yeah, I totally see those expectations to live up to um, what your parents or even, the grandmother wanted him to be, um, or not to be at that point too. Um, and I wonder too if then that connects not just to the queerness, but from this being the perspective also of a author of color, and like how there's often those
Mm,
perceptions too within families of color of what this quote unquote like normal is. And I can definitely see that from Joseph of wanting him to be like a human out in the world rather than Magos just wanting him to. I mean, that's also a big expectation to wanting him to be Santiago, um,
mm,
but maybe more for her only rather than necessarily for the world.
mm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the book really speaks to the pressures of living up to your parents' expectations or like ideas for what your life is going to become when you're older, especially as a queer person, because again, I just keep thinking of how much Joseph doesn't want M to be the one thing that he naturally is, which is monstrous. He wants him to break his nature to fit in and to kind of give Joseph the kind of son. I don't know if Joseph really considers him to be his son, but the kind of person that Joseph wants him to be. Um, but I think you're right, Sowell. I don't know if I really noticed as much expectation from Magos, um, but yeah, but I think that also probably relates to the fact that, at least for me, Magos did not feel as involved in M's life as Joseph did. Um, yeah. What do we think of the inclusion of like, not even inclusion, but focus on like kink or like fetishes in the story? Did anyone read M's uh, M's desire to bite people as a kink, or did you think that was just a part of his monstrous side coming out?
It it felt kind of like a pretty intentional inclusion of some kinks for me, especially if it had just been through M. I don't know if I would think that, but with the whole piece about Lena, I definitely
Hmm.
felt like it was an intentional inclusion. I don't know for M that it was that I would like classify it as kink in the same way as Lena's, just because of like M's whole like journey into being who he really needs to be, or like I guess what he really needs to be. And I think that's part of it. But I don't. I mean, it's obviously like kink for the people that he's having sex with, but um, I don't know. It's kind of half and half, at least for me with M, because I think half of it is like his like Monstrilio side, and the other half is um, maybe tied into just natural sexual urges and desires.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Michael. I think that for M, it was not necessarily a kink, but the way that he was able to realize this like desire was through this setting. And that like other people introduced him to that when they were helping like the person that he works with at the bookstore, helping him put his dating profile and like list that as like a thing that he's into. Um, that maybe hadn't seen as a possibility of like a kink, but just something that he like wanted to do. Um, and I was gonna say something else about that too, that now I can't remember. Yeah, but I don't think it was really a kink for M, but rather this just thing that he wanted to do that he. Oh, I wanted to bring up the other scene where he is going to that hookup where he himself gets beat up,
Hmm.
because then that seems like it's the kink for that other person,
Hmm.
um, and it just like kind of brought this like again maybe even others like another perhaps like representation of a monster in the story, this other person who like uses violence in this way. Because it seemed like that to me seemed like a trap for like the people that that other person was hooking up with, rather than this like kink almost. Because that wasn't something that that other person um had told M about, that was going to happen. Um, so that like seemed like a really dangerous part for M and for anybody else that's in the future going to hook up with that other person.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I do think that I don't know how intentional it is, but I do think that the author is making some sort of commentary on the world of kink. Also, especially because with both Lena and with M, the people they engage in their kinks with are strangers, as opposed to people who know and possibly even have a similar interest to them. Well, I guess Lena does engage with mostly sex workers, whereas M does not, but still strangers. And then I'm glad, Soul, that you brought up the moment with the man who begins to beat up M. That moment for me was so, reading it was obviously very anxiety inducing and uncomfortable. But I was curious just how far, if they both had their ways, how far would they have gone? Would M have killed that man, or would that man have even tried to kill M? Because it didn't seem like I'm sorry, it didn't seem like the man had any interest or inclination that he was going to stop. It seemed like he was going to push it until he eventually killed M. Did you guys notice that at all?
Yeah, I definitely thought that interaction would end a little bit more fatally
Hmm.
for someone, for either of them. I'm not sure who, but I could have seen it going, uh, all the way to death for one of them.
Mm.
Yeah, I was surprised that, and I think it was because M was caught off guard that M didn't kill the man.
Mm.
Because I also wonder like what had previously happened for that man, and then like other encounters that he had had, um, and if people eventually just stopped fighting him, and that was what he wanted. Um, but in this, it like seemed that he was surprised that M was fighting back, or I don't know, he just had like the bat that he had. It just seemed that he had done that before, and that maybe in the past it had also ended with one, either people getting away or running away, um, or maybe even dying.
Mm. Yeah. I'm also curious, I guess, is the author trying to kind of warn people of the dangers of dating apps? Because for both the people that M meets, and then of course uh, the man that he eventually meets up with, they both are like very scary figures and dangerous, especially when we get to the moment of M and Sam. Even though eventually it began as a consensual act, M biting Sam, and Sam was into it. He was okay with it. He actually encouraged M to keep going, but then it turns to Sam screaming and like begging for his life, and then M killing him anyway. Um, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I'm not sure that I caught it as like intentional commentary about dating apps, but I definitely uh, was. Oh, sorry. I definitely was thinking of there being some sort of like cautionary, like be more aware of yourself, be more aware of like what you want and need and who you're meeting up with. Because this is like M's first time meeting strangers like that, and he obviously doesn't know all of the like guards and defenses and maybe filters he needs to have up to prevent these situations from going on. So I think at some level there's like a little bit of warning. I don't know that I thought thought of it as like intentional commentary though, but I don't know, maybe it is. I think I would have thought of it as more intentional if maybe we had more examples, or maybe like more explicit conversation. Like if I forget the girl's name, that worked in the bookstore, she was like, oh, like you better watch out, there are crazy people on whatever dating app. But I don't think we really got that. And just like threw him out there and let him like figure it out all on his own.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I necessarily saw it as commentary on the dangers of dating apps. I did maybe see it as a commentary on like the danger that sometimes queer people have to put themselves in, or have like society has created, of like where queer people and queer love, queer relationships are like allowed to exist, that maybe that leads people to put themselves in more dangerous situations, um, that maybe they don't even expect, right? Like going back to that man that was violent with like him not expecting that to be something that might be so dangerous that he could die. Um, but sometimes like that is the reality, that some queer people that have to be more in the closet or just live in places that don't accept queer people, that they have to go into these spaces where it is dangerous to be with other people that they want to be with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll also say that that part, like, I guess I didn't realize how scary I found that moment with M and the man until like days after I read it. I began to realize like I intentionally like avoided dating apps and like Grinder for like a week or 2 weeks after I finished the book, because I was like, that really scared the hell out of me. And like I don't want to find myself in either one of the positions of like M or of the man. Um, so yeah. But I mean, also I will say I wish that instead of M killing Sam, he would have killed the man, simply because I think him killing the man, well, yes, obviously murder is bad, but he would have been killing someone who was very dangerous and harmful, as opposed to killing someone like Sam, who seemed like a pretty well-meaning, sweet guy. Of course, he was a part of a cult, but outside of that, it seemed like a pretty decent person. Did anyone else kind of wish that he wouldn't have killed Sam and killed the man instead?
I mean, yeah, it would have been like a little bit of a nicer wrap up, or it would have felt like a little bit more justice. But I don't know. We got what we got, I guess. Yes, no, I'm on the same page with you. I didn't want to say that, but
Yeah.
I think there was definitely that buildup up to Sam too, of like Sam not replying a lot to, or at all, to M for like the first few times that he tried to contact him. So I had expected there to be like a big thing that was gonna happen with Sam, um, like fully eating him, just because there was that whole, like I also don't know what it was about Sam that Em was really attracted to, or made him really want to eat him, whichever one he was mostly for. Um, but yeah, I just found that interesting. I mean, I also wish that he had killed that man, although maybe that would have also created like bigger issues in the trying to hide,
Mm.
because he also had got beat up by the man that he needed to go to the hospital. So um, that could have also made that link between the two. Whereas for Sam, um, maybe it was a little bit easier to like hide and wrap up in that way for the author. Um, Even though eventually they did test, I think M's hair, and found it out
Mhm.
to be from an animal. So um, I guess either way, when that happened, and I think that some of the characters brought it up too, to me, I was like, oh, so now he can like just eat people and like not get in trouble. Seems like that might be the solution to it. It's just to let him eat people and nobody will ever find out it's him. They'll just think it's this wild animal. So I also point also thought that that might be how the book wrapped up, that they were kind of gonna be in this like Dexter-esque thing where he just like kills bad people and that's the way that he lives his life. I thought that was how the book was gonna end, but it didn't.
Before we discuss the book's ending, I do kind of want to touch on something that I found, an interview that I found with the author, Gerardo Samano Cordova. He says that he intentionally wrote M as being neurodivergent, more than likely autistic. And I'm curious, I know, Saul, you mentioned earlier that M's dialogue definitely feels a bit like that. I'm curious, did anyone else notice that? I didn't at first, but going back, I can kind of understand. I can see that coming through in M's dialogue and perspective. Did anyone else notice that?
I don't know that I would have flagged it as neurodivergent. I think I just thought of it as like M is still adjusting, and I think part of that too may have been part of my confusion on the timeline. I think that Solo noted earlier is that like it wasn't really clear how many years, and it felt like M matured physically or like ended up in this like adult teenage body very quickly, or we didn't really get at least any development between, like, we don't know like how M was interacting with other people, and I thought that was part of it, but like it definitely does read as neurodivergent. I can definitely see that, but I attribute it to some other factors, and not necessarily to that. But do we? I'm curious hearing that comment though, like what M would have been like if the author hadn't written that in as part of like M's character. Would we have like a more, I don't want to say like socially adept, but like maybe an M that's a little bit more like integrated or in line with some of the things that Joseph is trying to like get him to do and be as like a, I don't know. That gives me a lot more questions than I had before.
Mm-hmm.
No, I totally agree with what Michael said about the reasons why I thought the character was written like that weren't this connection to maybe him being neurodivergent, but rather like not knowing how old he was or that he hadn't quite gotten like what it is like to live life as a human or to be more human than monster. Yeah, I didn't make that other connection.
Yeah, I mean, to Michael's question, I am curious what M would have been like had he maybe been neurotypical. I don't know, like what would he have still been a killer? Would he have maybe found other ways to express his emotions besides killing or having that desire to kill or a desire for violence? I don't know. I'm definitely curious how that would have gone. What do we think of the ending of the story? I know, Saul, you said that you did not expect it, neither did I. I think in the Discord, I said that I expected like a Frankenstein sort of story. So I definitely expected M kind of being like chased out of town by like an angry mob of people or being arrested for Sam's murder or even maybe being killed or killing himself at the end. Um, but what did we think of the decision for M to leave and kind of live his life as a monster in the wild?
I also wasn't expecting it, but I'm glad that that's the ending that we got. There were definitely a few times reading through where I I thought like, oh, M's gonna like get in trouble and like die. I'm glad you think that's funny. No, but I really like I was just assuming that was going to be the end of it, and that would be I don't know, maybe it would like trigger some and some like additional journey for Magos and Joseph. But I like this ending a lot better than what I expected, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm so used to quote unquote happy endings in books like these, so it was definitely a change of pace to see like a nicely wrapped up thing that didn't end up with, M dying. Because I also like for me was either like M getting caught or dying, or on the other end living his life, and now everybody's kind of like helping him murder people. And like that kind of being wrapped up as like it's still him being a monster but living within society. um yeah, so I like the way that it ended. I think it also wrapped up the kind of like grief motif of the book, as it kind of allowed then like Magos, Joseph, even Lena to um have closure as to, okay, not another person or dying, right? Like it would just be Santiago again, and another thing for them to grieve, but being able to allow that to for M to live the life that he was going to live, kind of like how Santiago could have lived the life that he was going to live, just a completely different life, um, to allow him to still not die and be this, right. So like not bringing more grief than before.
You took the words right out of my mouth. So I was going to say the exact same thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that M, towards the end of the story, is kind of the physical embodiment of everyone's grief. I mean, I think that a lot of the characters were stagnant or kind of like living in the past or living in a fantasy because M still existed. I think it's really difficult to move on from your grief when the object of your grief is like sitting right in front of you. And I think that after the performance of Mago's son, after that, she begins to stop calling him Santiago and begins to call him Emmy. I think that represented her kind of moving on. And I think that Joseph, going forward with his relationship with Peter, was him moving on. Lena, I'm not sure. It seemed like she was still kind of pining after Magos, even though they tried dating and didn't work out. Um, but yeah, I think as M leaves, they're all going to have to move forward with their lives. Um, so yeah, that's a really good point. Saul, not Santiago. Sorry. Yeah. And I guess I'm curious, what do we think is next for our characters after the ending? Do you think that Peter and Joseph even get married?
I hope not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. They already seemed like they were all kind of living together, and like how Joseph was upset that Magos was leaving before, which she eventually stayed, and then her saying, "Right, I stayed because this is where life is. My life is." Um, yeah, so I wonder if they're all just gonna live together. It kind of seemed like it seems like they're moving on, but together they're moving on. Um, I also hope that Peter and Joseph don't get married, but now that maybe M is gone, maybe their relationship will be more authentic.
Mm,
Although I agree with you, Jonathan, when you had mentioned before that Joseph didn't even seem happy that Peter asked him to marry him. Um, so I don't know if he really wanted to get married.
mm. Yeah, I had the same question. I mean, now that you mentioned, Saul, that Joseph was angry when Magos left, that made me think, does Joseph still kind of love Magos? He says he doesn't, he does love her like as a person, but not in love with her. But I'm not sure if I agree because it didn't make sense to me why he would be so resistant of her moving on with her life. And then Magos comes back and says that her life is here with them, but I wonder if she just meant that in terms of M. But now that M is gone, like what's left for her? If Peter and Joseph do get married, what is Magos going to do? Like, what's the point? But
Mhm.
yeah, like Michael said, I hope they don't get married. I think that you can't enter into a marriage with that many lies. So I hope they
Mm-hmm.
break up.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, do we think that M or Santiago or Emmy or whatever you want to call him, I guess, do we think that he was the only monster in the story? I know we touched on Lena's obvious backstory, but do we think that maybe all the characters in their own way are monstrous, or is it just M?
Oh, I definitely think all of them in their own way. I I think Joseph in in the sense of like I don't want to say like being an emotional terrorist, but like engaging with Peter in this way that like really is not exactly like what you just said, like it's not an authentic or honest relationship. Um, and Peter is just like written to be like such like sweet and kind and happy and like, oh, like how can I help? What can I do? And Joseph is just like keeping so much from him, like in a monstrous way. And I think Magos in the same way, like just behaves in a lot of like very selfish ways in a way that is like truly monstrous and like has her sights set on like one or two things and forgets about any consequences that don't affect her directly. So yes, definitely all of them in some way or another.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even Magos from the very beginning of taking the piece of lung from Santiago, just the image of like what Joseph walked into, um, it's like very reflective of actually that picture, that painting that you sent, Jonathan, in the
Mhm.
Discord of that like demon standing on somebody's body. Like that is kind of what I had picture Magos looking like. Um, over Santiago, just more blood.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think even from the beginning, like Magos definitely had that characteristic to me as well. For me, it's harder to see for Peter, just not Peter, for Joseph, because he's just such a boring character to me. But I can definitely see like other aspects of him um, that maybe are not this like gory type of monster, but that definitely don't make him the best person.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think they're all monstrous in their own ways. I mean, of course, we know that Lena has her backstory with being perceived as a demon or a monster. Um, and I think to Michael's point, I think that maybe Joseph is like monstrous in terms of his lies. It's like he has so much deceit and dishonesty in his entire life since he left Magos to where that's monstrous. And I think he is like ruining Peter's life if they do get married. That is going to ruin Peter's life because you're marrying someone who's such a liar. And Magos, I think even from the early beginning, we see signs of her being monstrous. I mean, like Saul, you said, when she cuts open Santiago's body and gets the lung, after that, she licks up his blood, um, like and like makes him clean again. And then as Joseph is grieving, we get moments of like Magos observing Joseph, like while he's showering, while he's eating, all these little things. She purposely tries to antagonize Joseph in a lot of ways, almost kind of tormenting him like a demon. And there's also like a moment, very, very brief, where Magos says that her mother always wanted her to be with Jackie because her mother thought that Jackie would be the one person Magos wouldn't swallow whole. So I'm not sure if that is like a nod to Magos maybe being some sort of like emotional vampire or something else monstrous. Did that line stick out to either one of you? The line of Mago saying her mother thought she wouldn't eat Jackie whole.
I don't think I caught that. Wait, do you mean Jackie or Lena?
I'm sorry,
What?
wait, what? Uh, Magos Magos's mother wanted Magos to date Lena because she thought Lena would be the one person Mago wouldn't swallow whole. Magos.
No, I actually I don't I think I caught or I'm remembering a moment of like Margos and her mother talking about her and Lena, but I don't remember um, her mother specifically saying that. But I definitely like I can I can see that, especially because Lena's like able to like go and still kind of like do her own thing in a way that Joseph is not when he is with Magos.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like you bringing up the after Santiago died and how Magos watched Joseph. I had never thought about that before, but it's definitely giving like stalking demon.
Mhm.
And then I slightly remember the point about Lena, but I also remember this other part of the book. I think it was still within Mago's perspectives where she's talking about herself as a younger child and how she throws this like globe, like beautiful globe over the balcony and it like breaks, and she's talking
Mhm.
about how much she loved that and like how much she loved like creating this like destruction. um
Mm.
so when I had read that, I thought that was like foreshadowing for like, I guess, you right, like she was the one that created the lung, so I was
Mhm.
picturing a lot of like, oh, destruction is going to come again from like something that she has done, um which would be, the creation of Monstrilio, and now that's going to bring a lot of destruction. Um, so yeah, I had kind of also seen her as like this agent of chaos, um, because of kind of how, again, selfish it seemed like her motives were in all of this. That she didn't do this for Joseph, even though she kind of tries to paint it as she's doing it for Joseph as well as herself. um, it just kind of seemed like she was doing what she wanted to do, which was bring Santiago back.
Mhm. Well, that's a really good point. I totally forgot about the moment of the snow globe, but you're right. It does kind of give like Agent of Chaos, like a demon. You're right. I know, Saul, you touched on earlier that this is not like a typical horror novel, and I think we all can agree on that. Do you think you would categorize this book as a horror novel? I don't think I would, but funnily enough, the book's description like really sells it as a horror. Do you think you'd categorize it somewhere else?
Yeah, I think I would. I haven't read a lot of horror books. I had read this other book. I read what is it called? It's this book. I can't remember the title, but everybody, there's like this disease that gets all animals infected, so now people have to eat like other people in order to like survive. I wish I
Hmm.
could remember what it was called. But that like the descriptions of people eating like, because basically people made like industrial farming but for people, like those descriptions were really scary and hard to read. So I was kind of expecting this book to have like way more of that, um which it didn't. It definitely had its scenes mostly at the end, um but even the description, I wouldn't say it was so horrible to read that I couldn't read it. I don't know what else I would categorize it besides like this kind of like magical realism, um, alternative as well.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I'll agree with you. I mean, I think that this is definitely not a typical horror story at all. There's not much gore, and I think for a large portion of the book, I was kind of disappointed because I think Magos's perspective is definitely more of like an eerie horror slash thriller. And then, of course, we pick that back up with M. But I think for Joseph and Lena, I didn't get really horror at all. It felt like an entirely different book. I think you're right, Sewell, that I would categorize it as a magical realism story or even like a family drama. I don't know if I would really harp on the fact that it's a horror story, because it wasn't just that for me. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
No, I agree with both of you. I wouldn't have put it in horror at all. I mean, there are definitely some like scary and gory aspects, but not enough for me for it to get even close to being like a horror book.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious. I mean, I know that Soal, you mentioned you don't read much horror. I know that I do. I'm not sure about you, Michael, but um, have either one of you noticed this like new trend of like horror media, like literature or television, film, whatever, focusing on grief so much? And if you have, what do you think of that? This like turn of grief being the like main horror element in most of these stories.
I don't know that I picked up on it, but now that you say that, the last horror book I read was literally about someone's house being haunted after their parents died.
Mm.
Like very, very clearly, like about a story about grief. So I'm not sure. I also don't consume a lot of like television type media, but um, I will keep that in mind as I read more because it may be there and something I just don't like pick up on or haven't connected the dots on yet.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a lot of like grief related things. What I have noticed a trend over though is this kind of like giving birth to demons trope that's going on. Like I'm watching the I'm watching the new American Horror Story
Hmm.
season. And that's basically what it is. It's like the Julia Roberts Emma Roberts? Yeah, Emma Roberts character, like she's pregnant with the devil. And then there's that new um movie with the girl from Euphoria, and she's like a
Hmm.
nun, and that's also like her giving birth to a demon. Um, so I don't know if that has been. I'm sure that has been a horror trope before, but I have just noticed it way more often in at least like brand new like coming out every week type of media that's happening right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I will say I noticed a bit of a trend. I mean, now that you bring up demons, Sual, I think that grief is one of the very real, I guess, monsters or demons that we all can experience in our life. And we all experience it differently, and it can be haunting. And I think instead of having to make up these like fictional demons and monsters, like you can just use your emotions. Because I think even within this story, we see just how desperate and the wrong decisions people can make in the name of grief. Um, and I'm not sure if that connects to everything else going on, but in this story for sure. Yeah.
Now, when you had shared that painting of like the demon on top of the woman and how there's like legends that happens when you have nightmares. I
Hmm.
thought that you were maybe hinting at the fact that the book was going to end with this being just like Magus's dream, or like a or that she was making up Monstrilio like out of her emotions. So I can definitely see like the power of those emotions to like create our own demons, even if they're not like real. Like it could have been this collective grief that created Monstrilio and that people were like imagining rather than this like actual um, monster that was actually eating people.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I shared in the Discord that I was wondering if that painting was going to provide some sort of foreshadowing for our story. And I did think that, yes, this is all going to be a dream, or I guess a nightmare, not a dream. A nightmare for one of our characters, or maybe Monstrilio eating people was more figurative than literal. That's not what we got, but since it's not what we got, I'm curious what the author's motivations were for using that image as the cover, if they were not trying to call to that painting at all. Hmm. Okay, and that's all the questions and everything I have in my notes. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, any plot lines you want to talk about, any characters you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, not for me.
I don't think for me either. I don't think we talked about the uncle a whole lot. I did like how accepting he was, but um, I don't really have a lot to say about him. I thought he was a good little like side character to add in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I would have preferred in the story if we would have taken out Lena's perspective and got the uncle's perspective. I think that would have been really cool since the uncle doesn't verbally speak. We could have kind of heard his thoughts about everything happening, especially because it seemed almost as if not only was the uncle accepting of who Monstrilio truly was, but also encouraging it. Like he brings him dead animals. He just like lets him eat raw meat. It's like and even in his own ways, he's described as being kind of, I don't know if I would say monstrous, but uh, I guess disfigured or, so it would have been nice to hear from that perspective what he thought of everything happening. But yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can move on from the book. Let's go ahead and talk about the book choice for next month. I know I mentioned it in our last meeting, but I think I want to read this book here titled Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. It is a sci-fi novel that has to do with demons, again, another demon trend, like Soal said, and aliens. It's a bit of a controversial read. I've heard that people either love it and it's the best thing they ever read, or hate it and couldn't finish it. So I'm curious what we'll think. I will go ahead and pop the link to the description in the chat, and you guys can read that and let me know if you are open to reading it for next month.
I still vote yes for this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I am very down. I love alien ones.
Nice. Okay. Well, I'm not someone who tends to like sci-fi, so I'm curious what I'll think. But maybe I'll like it. We'll see. Okay, so I'll go ahead and assign that. I was thinking for next month meeting, we could meet on the last Sunday again, which would be the 26th of May at 12 p.m. 12 p.m. PST, whatever time zone it is for you guys. Is that okay with you two?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Yep, works for me.
Cool. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put us down for that. You'll see a notification on book clubs, and you'll also see a Discord channel being made probably in a couple of hours. Um, and yeah, that's it. Does anyone else have any last minute thoughts, questions, comments, concerns about the book, about the club, about anything?
Nope.
No, just thank you as always for organizing everything and facilitating good discussion. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both for coming. And I guess my last minute thought is for Peter. And that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both for coming. It's nice to meet you, Sewall, and I hope that I can see you again next month. You
Yeah,
both have a
nice to
nice
meet you
day.
both. You too.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.